when I took on this role and I was looking at sort of historic research studies, it gives this impression that endometriosis is a condition that impacts women who are a lot older and women who have postponed having children as a result of their careers. And the focus always seems to be on fertility. So in these historic studies, women would present themselves with issues to do with fertility. And that's when they, at that point, would uncover that they had endometriosis. But then that limits then, in terms of focusing on what actually causes the condition. Why do we have it? And there are a number of theories at the moment. So some say that it actually presents itself at birth. Those who are assigned female at birth actually have the endometriosis cells present, but it only flares up as soon as they hit puberty. The fact that we don't still know what causes it, unfortunately, again, just limits our options in terms of our treatment. Part of the advocacy now is that we're trying to make people more aware about this condition, and we're trying to form allies and bonds so that we can start speaking up about this, because it does impact so many individuals.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune into what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your terms. But before we dive in, I've got a quick favour to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and helps us grow, reach more women, and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support that's right for you. Zainab, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with me today. It's all about your journey with endometriosis and adenomyosis. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. And I know you've had a very long journey with it, and I really appreciate you sharing the things that you're going to share today. So please, can you introduce yourself and talk about your journey and also the great things that you do as well? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Raya. So my name is Zainab. I am one of the co-support group leads for Birmingham and Black Country. So we support Endometriosis UK, which is a leading charity looking to support women and other individuals affected by endometriosis and adenomyosis as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I know you have a journey, a personal journey yourself. Could you kind of start with that? I know it stems from when you were a child, a teen, I guess, and go on from there. And then also, I know you had a very lengthy journey with diagnosis as well. So if you could delve into that a bit as well, that would be great.
Yeah. So from as long as I can remember, I had very extremely painful periods. They were debilitating. So, I would experience nausea, very heavy bleeding. So it would soak through my clothes. When you're a teenager, it's incredibly embarrassing for that to happen to you. I also would faint from the amount of blood that I was losing, have nausea, fatigue, anemia as a result. And it was something that even when I presented myself to the GP, it was something that was sort of told that it was just an experience that every woman had. And sort of to just sort of suck it up and get on with it, because everybody else has the same sort of issues. So I just assumed that this is what every woman experienced when they had their menstrual cycle. And the older I got, the more painful it got, and it was starting to impact my studies, my working life. And it was only through my sister, who ended up having an endometriosis diagnosis quite late on in her life, post 40 years old, that she started to sort of see the similarities in symptoms. And she encouraged me to go to the doctor. and try and push for a diagnosis. But from the time I was experiencing those type of symptoms to when I got my diagnosis was 14 years.
Wow.
And that unfortunately is not an uncommon experience within our community. So currently at the minute, it's over 8 years to get a diagnosis, and it's actually increased since COVID. So yeah, it's just one of the unfortunate things that people with endometriosis are dealing with is the delays in diagnosis, and then subsequently to that, delays in treatment.
Do you think delays in diagnosis leads to it getting worse? And has that been the case for you? You know, for example, if at the point you went to see your GP in your teens and you were sent off, referred to someone to do some investigations and diagnosed as a teenager, do you think things would have been better for you in terms of your outcomes? And has it resulted in more, it being progressively worse for you?
In my case, it definitely did progress, and so I saw a consultant right before the pandemic. And unfortunately, that did then contribute to the delays in actual treatment, which I'm sure we can go on to in a bit. But within a space of a few years, I had to have routine scans. And within each of those scans, it showed that my endometriosis was growing. So it was getting progressively worse. So
Mm.
in my case, I can say for certain that yes, I think if I had the treatment earlier on, maybe I wouldn't be experiencing so much pain as much as I did. But it's sort of a catch-22. You're in a rock and a hard place. You're dependent on a specialist trying to push for your treatment, but at the same time, you're having to deal with lengthy waiting times. But yeah, I'm sure that that is the case for many individuals. That the earlier on we can get treatment, the more we can sort of manage our condition better, because there is no cure for endometriosis, unfortunately. Sort of the gold standard is laparoscopy, so surgically removing the endometriosis, but unfortunately it can grow back, which then means that we have to have recurrent surgeries to treat it. So, but if I had the awareness that I was dealing with this condition earlier on, I may have made some changes or tried certain medications or things like that, which might have alleviated my symptoms. But yeah, unfortunately for me, just because of the delays in diagnosis, I wasn't really granted that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like, when something is left and not treated, you're almost giving it permission to be let free and
Yeah,
grow and get worse. And
yeah,
saying, hey, I can do what I want, really, in terms of the disease, because
yeah,
no one's doing anything about it. Just, for people to know as well, what is endometriosis and adenomyosis? And also, from what I know now, it can occur anywhere in your body. It's not just limited to kind of your reproductive organs, I guess.
yeah. So endometriosis is a chronic inflammatory condition. So it's where the cells similar to those cells that are in the lining of your womb grow outside of your womb, and they can grow anywhere. So these cells respond and change during your menstrual cycle. So your menstrual cycle almost sort of like ignites it, and it causes an incredible amount of inflammation, scarring, and then pain. So it commonly affects the pelvis and the pelvic organs. So, like your ovaries, your womb. But like you mentioned, it can grow anywhere in the body. As far as we know now, it impacts 1 in 10 women that are assigned female at birth. And it can happen from anywhere between puberty to menopause. Um, and the symptoms are quite persistent. So they happen every month. they're not only just limited to your menstrual cycle, you can experience pain outside of your menstrual cycle. Some people have pain for a few days a month. Some people, it lingers for weeks. But yeah, I think you've touched on a really good point, which is something that as support group leaders, we're really trying to educate people that it's not only a gynecological condition, it's a full body condition. So the pain that we experience isn't just limited to our pelvis. We can experience back pain, severe fatigue, leg pain, neck pain, um, you know, for me personally, when I experience a flare up, it almost feels like somebody has trapped my insides with barbed wire and they're just tightening over time. And there's really nothing that I could do to alleviate that, even if I take pain medication, or even if I have dietary changes. That sort of pain just seems to persist. Going to mention about adenomyosis. So adenomyosis is a sister condition to endometriosis. So what we often find is that individuals with endometriosis also get diagnosed with adenomyosis. Adenomyosis is much similar to endometriosis, where the lining of the womb grows outside of the womb. But in adenomyosis, it actually grows within the uterine muscle. The unfortunate thing about adenomyosis is there is no surgical treatment for adenomyosis outside of having a hysterectomy. So with endometriosis, a surgeon could go in and excise the endometriosis where he sees it. Because of where it's located in the actual muscle of the uterine wall, there's no surgical option to actually remove that. So the treatment options for adenomyosis are quite limited. So what's recommended is we take hormonal contraception to sort of limit our menstrual cycles in the hopes that it will alleviate our pain. Yeah, it's sort of two-pronged, really. If somebody has endometriosis, it's likely that they might also have adenomyosis as well.
Are there any, I know, you work for the charity. In terms of research and what's going on now, are there any kind of new developments in this space in terms of they are finding out more and more and treatment options are becoming better? What's happening in that area in terms of research on women? Because it feels like, I always say, God knows how long the research is going to take to catch up because we're so behind. So it's almost a case of, right, well, we need to just empower ourselves with the knowledge, and as in the right knowledge and not the misinformation knowledge, of course. That's the other problem with, social media as well. There's so much misinformation, and use that knowledge to advocate for ourselves. So in terms of the charity you work for, if you talk about that and also what are the new developments happening, that would be great.
So Endometriosis UK at the moment, it's doing most of its work is around raising awareness about the condition. And they don't directly do carry out any research, but that's not to say that in the future that they might not do that. But currently, the research is incredibly limited. We don't know what causes endometriosis, and we don't really know how best to treat it either. It seems particularly for other individuals that I speak to, it is very much trial and error. So sort of that then causes issues in terms of treatment. So a lot of our treatment options are hormonal based, and or pain management, or having the surgery, which I can go to in a bit more detail in a bit and talk about my personal experience with that. But in terms of research, there hasn't been much research, I'd say, within the last decade or so that has uncovered anything, anything that would help us understand this condition more. So I think that then limits what we can do as individuals in terms of advocating for ourselves and advocating for treatment options. When I took on this role and I was looking at sort of historic research studies, it gives this impression that endometriosis is a condition that impacts women who are a lot older, and women who have postponed having children as a result of their careers. So it kind of gives this kind of twisted impression that almost that women who choose, their careers and their personal lives over, having this traditional setup of a family are then sort of punished in a way by having this condition. And the focus always seems to be on fertility. So in these historic studies, women would present themselves with issues to do with fertility, and that's when they, at that point, would uncover that they had endometriosis. But then that limits, then, in terms of focusing on what actually causes the condition. Why do we have it? And there are a number of theories at the moment. So some say that it actually presents itself at birth. So that, those who are assigned female at birth actually have the endometriosis cells present, but it only flares up as soon as they hit puberty. But I think the fact that we don't still know what causes it, unfortunately, again, just limits our options in terms of our treatment. So I think part of the advocacy now is that we're trying to make people more aware about this condition, and we're trying to form allies and bonds so that we can start speaking up about this, because it does impact so many individuals. And it's not good enough that we don't have, good, decent treatment options. So at the moment, we have hormonal contraception. We also have the sort of hormonal contraception that induces chemical menopause. So that's often given to us where hormonal contraception has just stopped working, and in the hopes that if we sort of chemically induce menopause and we stop periods altogether, then hopefully that will alleviate our symptoms. But there's a whole host of issues that happen as a result of that I don't feel is really taken into consideration. Such as, I know individuals who are in the early 20s and they're experiencing hot flashes. They're experiencing alopecia as a result of going through the chemical menopause. Their mental well-being is impacted, and they don't really get the sense that their doctors and their medical professionals are taking into account, those really horrible side effects that they're going through, and giving them a suitable alternative. We're just sort of told, well, there is nothing else, so you either do this or there isn't anything else that we can do, which again, I have to stress, is just not good enough for how much it impacts so many individuals. We really should be putting time, energy and resources into carrying out further research into endometriosis, particularly trying to establish what actually causes the condition. Because I hope if we were able to do that, then we would be able to know, how to best treat it.
With the research, I don't know what's up with that. I mean, there are, did you say 1 in 10 are affected?
1 in 10.
Yeah. And that's just absolutely ridiculous. That's a lot of women. And it's not just about, 1 in 10 are affected. It sometimes starts with teenagers, then it affects, and it can affect their, studies and going through the exam process, all of that, which then in turn affects their kind of, chances of higher education. If they don't get the grades, they're not, able to progress, which then has an impact on their earning potential, which then has an impact on, obviously if you're going through the motions of endometriosis, it also has an impact of, taking a lot of time out potentially to not be in work because of all the all the, issues you're having, which then in turn has an effect on the amount you have at retirement. So it's a huge knock-on effect on so many things, but it's almost as if because it's a woman's issue, no one actually cares,
Yeah.
And with you, I know you said, it started in your teens. How old were you when it started for you, or when you started noticing that, gosh, this is not right?
Around 13, 14.
13, 14. Now, and then you go to the GP at some stage, and you're kind of dismissed because you're made to feel like, well, this is what girls go through. This is what's happened, and and it's almost a case of, you're still quite young, and your body's still changing, so
Yeah,
this may disappear, rather than, and also actually, a lot of the time you're given contraception, the contraceptive pill, to
yeah,
mask what's actually going on. And correct me if I'm wrong, I know that can help with the pain and mask what's going on, because you're not actually diagnosing anything, you're just kind of masking the symptoms.
yeah.
And then you go through life. I've heard stories of women going through life taking the pill, and later on discovering they've got endometriosis and having this huge impact later on in life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but I think you've touched on a good point here that the pill does work for some individuals, and for some individuals it really doesn't. For me, when the GP sort of presented an option of, well, just take contraception, being from the background that I'm from, so my parents are Mauritian. My mum was completely against that, just because of the connotations of taking the pill. And she didn't want, anybody within our family or within our sort of extended circle to find out I'm taking the pill and think possibly I'm sexually active. So, I was sort of restricted in that sense, that I wasn't even able to try that as an option at that age. And GPs just didn't seem to understand the sort of cultural implications of recommending something like that. And, I think that then contributed to them not really wanting to offer any alternative, because I wasn't willing to take the pill when they offered it to me. So I spent a lot of years just sort of suffering in silence, because there wasn't really any alternative that was presented. Um, uh, yeah, so it's very difficult, and I think there's a lot of sort of cultural dynamics at play as well when you're dealing with a condition like endometriosis. That certain things that they might prescribe to you on parents wouldn't be comfortable with that,
Yeah.
and trying to understand sort of the wider, you know just the wider consequences of that, um, within sort of our communities.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. In the communities, lots of communities aren't aware of these things, and there's so many taboos. Even wearing a tampon. You know,
yeah,
that was like, no, you can't wear a tampon, because it's almost like you're going to lose your virginity.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm sure lots of people can relate who are from the, communities that grew up with these taboos. And, you know, I want to come onto the taboo side of things shortly, but
yeah.
I know, so you went through the motions in your teens. When did you get taken seriously? At what point? How old were you when they said, actually, we need to kind of do some more testing on this?
I had just turned 29, and I was really fortunate, because I visited my GP, and it was a student doctor who was present, and I just went to sort of get my pain medication, and he was able to take the time to read through my notes, and it was when he sort of suggested, I think you should probably see a specialist, because this is something you've been dealing with for a very long time. Um, that it was only really at that point that I felt like, oh gosh, a medical professional is actually looking at my notes and can see there's been a persistent problem, and actually wants to do something about it. But between that referral being made and me actually seeing a specialist, that took about a year.
Mm.
And unfortunately for me, my experience with the specialist was very lackluster. It was a very rushed appointment. I was just told I could potentially have endometriosis. And then I was just sent away. So I wasn't given an opportunity to ask what that meant for me, or what that actually was, or how that was appearing in my body. And then afterwards, it took just a lot of self-learning to sort of fill in the gaps. And this is when endometriosis came in to my life, and they were a lifeline for me, because they were able to educate me on the condition and sort of just affirm what I was going through, and gave me very useful tips, hints, and suggestions for how to sort of navigate these appointments, what to ask, that'd be beneficial for me, just how to live with this and manage this condition. But yeah, without that, unfortunately, specialists just don't have time to sit down with every patient and sort of answer all the questions that you've got. But it's a very heavy diagnosis to have, because, like you mentioned, it impacts so many things. It impacts your quality of life, your relationships. Even for me, there's been times when I've put my career on hold because I couldn't possibly imagine, being in a senior position and having to deal with the stresses that could come with that, alongside with this condition, because, treatment options I was given at the time weren't helping me. So it has massive ramifications on an individual's life. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, good thing that student doctor noticed something that wasn't right. But then again, you went on to see specialists, and that didn't turn out great either. So what was the next step then after that? Did they do scans to understand that actually you have endometriosis and this is the extent? And then what happened from then onwards?
Yeah, so it was when I look back on it, it was a very interesting experience, to put it that way. So I initially went for a scan. So there's two types of scans that you have. You have the internal transvaginal scan, and then you have a scan that's on your abdomen. So I had both of those. And then I was put forward for an MRI. When I initially got the MRI findings, they said that they couldn't detect endometriosis. So I was a bit taken aback by that, because the symptoms I presented to the specialist suggested that I did. But I then later came to find out that not all MRI technicians are trained to detect endometriosis. So an MRI report doesn't necessarily reflect whether you've got the condition or not. It's all dependent on the technician that's able to read your scans, and whether or not they are trained to be able to detect endometriosis. I then had subsequent scans, and fortunately for me, I did have a technician that was able to detect endometriosis, and they suggested that actually I had severe endometriosis. So that really highlighted to me, actually, MRIs, which is sort of the first port of call after a transvaginal scan and an abdomen scan, that they're not always going to reflect your diagnosis or how severe it is. But it's just the stepping stone that we have to sort of follow in order to then get onto a waiting list for a laparoscopy. So I had those scans. I had several scans while I was waiting for my surgery date. And it sort of showed that my ovaries were growing closer and closer to my womb, meaning to say that the endometriosis was likely around my ovaries, and they were kind of just pulling it together. One thing I should probably preface with that: endometriosis, the cells itself are incredibly sticky. So as they grow and expand over time, and they sort of get flamed, they kind of draw everything around it closer to each other, which is why a lot of us with severe endometriosis, we find that some of our organs sort of stick together. For me, I just had a surgery a couple of months ago, and they identified that my bowels had all stuck together as a
Wow.
result of my endometriosis. So that's just sort of to help aid listeners as to what it actually does in your body. And then about 2 years later after that, I finally had my first laparoscopy. And I found out after the surgery that my endometriosis was very severe, that it had kind of just spread throughout my pelvis. And yeah, it had started to grow onto my bowels. My surgeon wasn't expecting it to be such an intense surgery. So they excised as much endometriosis as they possibly could do. But even then, when I woke up from the surgery, and you're kind of hoping that your surgeon was sort of tell you or what they found, and what they did. But even then, I have more questions than I have answers from that. So he told me that he did find endometriosis. And that he took away as much as possible. And when I asked him, well, what's sort of the best treatment option for me now, he just recommended that I go on the pill. But it was a comment that he made that sort of threw me off. And he said, well, most people who have endometriosis don't have any issues whatsoever, and they just carry on with their lives normally. And I mean, at that point, I found the whole thing incredibly isolating. I didn't know anybody else outside of my sister who had endometriosis. And I felt that that was quite a harsh comment to make, because now, as a support group leader, and I meet so many individuals at varying stages of their diagnosis journey, I know that not to be true. But it's alarming that a surgeon, an endometriosis specialist, can say something like that when they probably meet people with the condition every day, and that's the impression that they have, that we just get on with it and it's absolutely fine. There's nothing to worry about, really.
Yeah, it's almost, I understand consultants, surgeons, they are on a limited time. And from my experience, even, whether it's NHS or private, it's almost like you've got your 10 minutes, and you almost feel like, even if you're going privately and you're paying for something, you feel like, actually, I'm rushed and I've got all these questions and I feel like an idiot for asking these questions, because they're kind of like, right, this is what it is and off you go, kind of thing. And right, next person in. And it's like you need someone there, like a nurse or someone, to kind of, after, like post surgery or post finding out about something that you have, to talk you through things, which, I mean, that would be fantastic if we could get that. That would be great.
Yeah. Agreed.
In
Yeah.
hindsight. But how did this affect you in terms of, we talked about the taboos and everything, and, things like you can't take the pill because, again, that's a taboo thing. We talked about the kind of tampon thing. How did this kind of narrative of you having endometriosis, and even just starting with your symptoms of heavy periods and all the pain you went through, how did it go down with the family?
It was challenging. So periods in sort of the South Asian community, I can say, is still treated as a taboo. It's not something that's sort of, seen as sort of this natural thing that, people signed up, female at birth go through. So it was something that wasn't spoken about openly. And so I would have to say things like, I'm sick or I'm ill to my dad, instead of saying, oh, dad, I'm on my period. So it's almost like already from the get-go treated like it's a sickness and it's an illness that's happening to me, rather than something that's just very, very natural.
Yeah.
And I remember, I would have to hide like my sanitary pads. I would have to make sure I put it in a plastic bag, and that plastic bag has to be wrapped up in tissue and thrown away. It's almost like I had to just pretend like I wasn't going through this experience, and trying to manage that with extremely heavy periods and just the general unwell feeling that I would get every month. It was very difficult to manage. And, I would often get scolded at if I had accidentally leaked, and my bleeding was visible on my clothes. because it's like a very embarrassing thing to have happened, but it's something that was just beyond my control. So it's not something that I look back on and I think it was not a pleasant experience for me. And even when I went to my mom presenting with, heavy periods, she would recount to me, this is similar to experiences that she had when she was growing up. And, you just had to have a stiff upper lip about it and sort of get on with it. So it's more like, the sort of impression that I got when growing up was that you just, as a woman, you just had to suffer in silence, unfortunately. And it's very different now when I have conversations with my mother about it, because I'm very vocal about it now, and she knows my role, as a support group leader, and she's very happy that I didn't let how just sort of the embarrassment and the fear about periods stop me from being vocal about it now, because she can see sort of the benefit of that. And she wishes that she had access to that support when she was younger.
Yeah.
So the other thing that it also impacted was sort of my self-esteem. So I was always felt like there's something wrong with me. And, particularly when I got an inkling that I had an endometriosis diagnosis, there was this sort of urgency from my family, like, gosh, you need to get married now. We need to get you married. We need to get you settled down because, potentially you could have fertility problems, and, potentially, you could be a burden on a family. So we need to get this sorted now. So that seemed like, just the focus and the attention wasn't on my well-being. It was more so on, oh gosh, like, you're probably not going to be suitable for anybody. Like, how are we going to be able to tell people that you've got this condition? Like, it's going to make you look like, you're not an ideal candidate for anybody to get married to. So I felt this inordinate amount of pressure that, oh gosh, like, I've really got to settle down now. I've got to really think about having a family, when I wasn't mentally ready for that. So, and even when we would go and we would meet potential suitors, so I'm talking about this in the context of an arranged marriage where,
Yeah.
families would introduce you to another family, and, possibly potentially progress into actually getting married. I was actively encouraged to not talk about my endometriosis and not talk about my painful periods, and sort of just act like everything was normal and there was nothing wrong with me, because that could potentially, drive away a suitor, or, cause issues with a family, which
And it
I really,
probably would. It probably would have, to be fair. I mean, if
yeah.
everyone's in that situation, I don't want to make generalizations in that sense, but I'm pretty sure the person and the family you're meeting would definitely, if you had said, I have this condition, or I have, whatever it is, they would have run a mile and said,
Mm.
I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen with my son.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me that, I didn't directly ever um, tell like a family that I had endometriosis, but when I was talking to individuals and trying to get to know them, I think they sort of picked up on that I was always ill, like every month, and that just was really off-putting to them. So yeah, like you said, we don't want to make any generalizations, but definitely my experience, I think I might have driven some people away, because they just
Yeah.
probably looked at me as somebody, oh, they've probably got issues or health issues or something. We just don't want to
Yeah.
deal with that. So it did impact my self-esteem, because I felt like my whole purpose in life just amounted to whether or not I was suitable to get married, and whether or not I could have a family and children. And one thing that I really try and stress is that endometriosis can impact fertility, but 70% of women do go on to have children naturally. So it doesn't cause infertility. And I think, there's unfortunately, this misconception when you've got a condition that predominantly impacts your reproductive organs, that you're automatically not going to be able to have a child. You can have a child. Sometimes people opt to have help with that and go through the IVF process. But, a lot of women do end up conceiving naturally. And I almost have to remind myself of that because I'm much more than just somebody's wife, or I'm much more than potentially becoming a mother. There's so many other ambitions and things that I want to do that make me me. But trying to share that and celebrate that within my South Asian household didn't always get the best response, unfortunately. Um, so yeah, there's been a lot of self-learning. It's been a journey with my family. So my dad is 83 now, and even still, it's very difficult to have conversations with him about menstrual health, about endometriosis. And when I've spoken to him about it, his stance and his view is that this is much more of a spiritual disease. So there's also those sort of religious connotations as well
Mm.
that I know from talking to other individuals is not only my experience. So for me, my dad would tell me that I was probably not praying hard enough, or that I wasn't being a good person, and that this was then manifesting into this illness. Which obviously is not true in any way. Although we don't know what causes endometriosis, what we do know is that it can impact anybody. So even if I was, say, an athlete growing up and I had the best diet and I had taken all the greatest supplements, I would still have this illness. Then it doesn't just impact people who do particular things or have a particular lifestyle.
Mm.
Unfortunately, it doesn't discriminate like that. But yeah, there's definitely been things that I've had to sort of navigate through and have had to challenge. And it is still, a process, particularly with my family and my extended family. Although even my mother now is incredibly supportive of, the support group um, role that I do, she still doesn't feel comfortable, say at family functions or things where I'm sharing that, and people have seen articles that I've been involved in and my sort of face is out there. Still feels quite apprehensive that she doesn't want everybody to know. She just kind of want to limits it, because for fear of what people would say or what type of impression it would give. But I feel now really empowered by my diagnosis, particularly having met so many people with the condition and being able to connect with them, and knowing that this isn't an isolated experience. This is an experience that a lot of us have. And I truly believe that only by talking about it, shedding light on it, can we incite and change, really.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? You've come a long way, and sometimes the taboos and the kind of lack of support with family as well, it can really affect you, in a really bad way, especially with mental health. And sometimes it can also, if you're feeling stressed and anxious because of all of that, your body will react in certain ways as well, So I think always I say to everyone, if not everyone's going to change no matter what age they are. We talk about our parents' generation, a lot of our parents' generation, when they're in their 70s, 80s, they already have their views set in stone, and the likelihood of changing their mind or opinion is the probability is quite low, in my opinion. And I just say, look, it is what it is. It's acceptance, and just going, that is what it is. I'm going to go and find my tribe, the people that are going to support me, whoever they are. And also, finding people that are from your community as well that are going through the same, so you can resonate and feel that actually, you know, it's not just me. We all share this together, and we also all share these kind of issues with our family members and so on, you know, because
Yeah.
ultimately, you know, especially with the South Asian community, and it still goes on. If you haven't ticked off the education piece, the marriage piece, and the reproducing piece, you
Hmm.
failed,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
It's
And
really unfortunate, but
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And it's like, it's terrible. And it has such an impact on your mental health. And I'm assuming, you know, it had a huge impact on your mental health as well, not just going through what you went through, but even having the kind of negativity around all the taboos and all of that going on as well.
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah, definitely. I think, it just goes back to your self-esteem. I think especially when you're sort of growing up, you're trying to figure out who you are and what you
Mm.
like, what you don't like, and what you want to do in the future. And you're not really granted any grace because you're experiencing debilitating pain every month. You're still expected to show up and to sort of do your best and get the good grades and get the good job and, do everything that you possibly can. But yeah, talking about mental health, and just going back to sort of uh, going to the GP. Unfortunately for me, during that sort of diagnosis process of 14 years, I was misdiagnosed with mental health, and also with IBS as well. So my
Wow.
symptoms are sort of attributed to that, to say, you've got social anxiety, so that's why you've got this pain, this cyclical pain every month. And when I sort of pushed that and said I don't really feel unwell outside of this week that I'm having my period, was told, oh, okay, possibly it could be IBS then. So unfortunately, part of the sort of issues that we have with diagnosis is that often, because our symptoms do appear, like other symptoms for other conditions, we do often get misdiagnosed, and then it becomes a case of trial and error again. That we get given a diagnosis, we get treatment for something. Obviously, it doesn't end up working because it's not for the condition that we've got. And yeah, we're just sort of stuck in a loop then, just trying to figure out what it is that we're actually dealing with. But I've definitely noticed a shift in the past few years where we are talking actively about endometriosis, thankfully.
Yeah.
And there seems to be much more awareness from medical practitioners about the condition. And as support group leaders, we always try to invite medical practitioners to hear about our first-hand experiences,
Mm.
not in the sense to, to bash anybody within the medical field, because we completely understand and appreciate that they have got limitations and they're just working to their best capability. But it's really important that they understand sort of the personal ramifications that it has on somebody. In terms of, if like we were talking earlier on, if I had a diagnosis earlier, maybe I could have had better treatment and I would have been able to manage my condition better, and it probably wouldn't have advanced as much as it possibly did. Um, but yeah, and I really hope that continues, and then I hope that sort of enters the sort of research sphere, and that we can actually get some decent research into the condition.
Yeah, definitely need more research. And, you know, like you mentioned, there's a theory. I mean, you know, it's a theory
Mm,
that it starts from conception, I
yeah,
guess. But then if it starts from conception, you know, the male and the female are involved with conception. You
yeah,
know, it's not just women. So
yeah,
it's almost kind of like, yes, we do need to go way back into that and maybe find out some more. But yeah, I mean, I don't know when that will come up. But my question to you is, knowing everything you know now and everything you've been through, what would you have done differently? And what advice would you give to someone that's going through these symptoms and, just these symptoms are just starting out for them, or maybe they've been suffering in silence for, a few months or a year, which is long enough as it is.
Yeah, when I talk to people now who are very early on in their sort of diagnosis journey, I really try and sort of stress how important advocacy is, and just sort of doing that self-learning. So Endometriosis UK have got an incredible tool, and it's called a symptom tracker. And you can go on there, you can record your symptoms, so how frequently you get pain, where you get pain, and it helps you sort of localize that. So is it in your abdomen? Do you get leg pain, sciatica pain? Because it can show up in varied ways. And once you've completed that symptom tracker, it then produces a letter that you can actually take to your GP,
Oh, wow.
explaining the symptoms that you've got, and also what that potentially that this could possibly show endometriosis, and that really please take this into consideration and make the appropriate referral. So I try and invite people to do that if they feel that they've got that. The other thing is that just the amount of resources that we've got on the website is incredible. So to learn about the condition itself, how to manage it, all the treatment options, what that means in terms of the side effects and things. Because often what I found is that when you go to present your symptoms at the GP and they offer you medication, they don't spend time telling you about the side effects. So for me, a long time, and this is sort of the first port of call, we're giving non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So that's like your ibuprofen, your naproxen. But unfortunately for me, because I've been taking them for years, I developed an allergy to it. So I can't take that anymore. So now I'm on opioid-based painkillers. But
Wow.
even that prolonged use of opioid-based painkillers can actually make your pain worse. But you're not told that. I only found that out myself through a webinar that Endometriosis UK had put on with an endometriosis specialist. So these things are incredibly important. So when you go to your GP, if they recommend anything, please do the additional research to look at the side effects, to look at any symptoms that you should be aware of. So even say with the contraception, a lot of us experience prolonged bleeding. So we experienced bleeding for months, but I think for me in particular, I was so used to heavy bleeding that I didn't realize that actually, this pill's not working for me, because I'm getting even heavier bleeding with this pill, and that potentially I should try something else. So I would strongly advise advocacy. Really speak up for yourself, because your pain is real. And it's not normal to experience debilitating pain when you're having a period. That's not the norm. And if you are experiencing debilitating pain where you can't get up in the morning, you can't get out of bed, it's impacting your work life, it's impacting your relationships with people, at that point, that pain is outside the realms of what we would consider normal for period pain. And you should be able to go see a doctor and be able to relay that information to them. So I would definitely stress advocacy. Do the symptom tracker. That way you can see when the pain is occurring, if a flare up happens as a result of something, or if it's weekly, or if it happens for 2 weeks. You'll be able to sort of arm yourself with the information and present yourself to the GP with as much information as possible. And also for me, it's about being able to understand the condition, and also our community. So as support group leaders, we really invite people, at any stage of the diagnosis, to come and join our community. So Endometriosis UK has around 200 volunteers at the minute.
Mm-hmm.
And they have nationally various support groups. So definitely get in touch with a support group lead. Find yourself a community where you're able to speak to other individuals who are going through something similar. No, for our group, it's been incredible to see how much, support and just being able to share that personal experience of having this condition, and we've got people from all walks of life, from all different ages as well. And it's also great to see, men joining our group as well, because they've got partners or they've got employees who've got the condition and they just want to learn a bit more on how to better support. So we're in desperate need of allies as well, even people who don't have the condition. So advocacy, education, and research, and community as well. If I could go back in time, those are the sort of pillars that I would really try and put in my life to sort of help me try and navigate the endometriosis diagnosis.
Absolutely. I'm a huge advocate for advocacy.
Yes.
And I just think, without pushing, like, you really must push your medical professional and say, no, I need to be seen. And, it's not a big, it's a case of being referred,
Yeah.
and it's not like they have to spend hours and hours doing their own research on something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very simple task. And I think, yes, the details of the organization will be in the show notes as well. So if anyone is experiencing any of these things that we've just talked about, please do go and have a look. And it's also not just, heavy periods aren't normal either. It's anything, you need to know what normal is. That's the first thing. What
Mm-hmm.
is normal and what is your normal in your body? And anything outside of that, you should advocate for your health and get it seen to. But Zainab, thank you so much for sharing your journey. I really appreciate you talking about, things on a personal level. The more kind of people like you that come forward and speak about these things that people can relate to and resonate with, it's great, because only then, you can really kind of advocate even more for yourself and others. And perhaps one day, miraculously, they will be doing lots and lots of research on endometriosis, that's for sure. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Shreya.